A2000 SPQR. And the build is continuing. I think I mentioned this before, but paper models, you got to be very patient with them. You got to keep fitting and test fitting and breaking the paper up, and it will form to what form you want it to do, but you got to be gentle. And there's tricks. If the paper's too thick, you can shave the back of it and thin it out a little bit. If it gets damaged, you can replace it with whatever stock you got. And if you manage it right, you can come up with a pretty nice looking model. Did some research on the V-1 buzz bombs. The Brits called it a doodlebug, but the V stood for vengeful weapons at the time. There were over almost 10,000 of these built and launched. Out of the 10,000 that were launched, only 6,000 hit. And out of the 6,000 that hit, only about 4,000 found targets that, or cities or whatever, that caused the damage. Most of the time it would fall into the ocean. It would land and not detonate. It would hit pastures and fields, killing cows, that kind of thing. Anyway, so much for the history. The fuel that they used was called, they used two types of liquid fuel, T-Stoff and C-Stoff. Every time they filled a compartment with one or the other, they had to be separated. That means that if you put a funnel in for C-Stoff, you would have to flush the funnel out with water to use the T-Stoff. Because if the two chemicals, the two fuels, or propellants, were to make contact with each other, there would be a terrible flammable explosion. With paper models, you can get very creative. You can use colored pens to doctor up your construction, especially if there's white paper folds exposing themselves. You can color them in to match the color of the paper. You can use oil paints, anything you want. Before you do any of that, check your model and see if it'll do anything as of reacting to the paper by damaging the form or shape. For instance, I put water slide decals on this model, and if I put water on the paper, it would definitely weaken the glue, it would weaken the paper, it would do terrible things. So take from your craft store some kind of sealant that's designed for paper and spray your model. That way when you do have water contact with your construction, it'll protect it from warping or destroying the paper itself. The V-1 rocket did not have iron crosses and things like that on it. It was unnecessary. It was just a rocket. They did paint them. When they came out of the factory, they were painted the constant primer of a dark yellow. They'd come out to the factory that way, and then it would go to whatever locations assigned. If the crew had nothing to do and they had the resources, they would paint the rockets, whatever they had available. With what? Sometimes they used a spray gun, sometimes they used brooms, if they chose to do that. Other times the rocket was just left in its dark yellow primer, and as it was exposed to the elements during time, the yellow would turn into a dark chocolate brown. But I put the water slide iron crosses on there for eye candy. I just wanted to give a little flash. But this is not historically accurate. This rocket did have elevators, rudder, ailerons to navigate, except for the main wing, which was interesting. Picture your, if you will, this is pretty accurate. Through the hull, they had a rod that ran like this. And what they would do is they would take spare wings and simply insert them into the rod and screw them from underneath to secure them to this rod. And the rod, like a submarine, like a diving plane, would spin, and which would elevate these at the same time or depress them at the same time. So this whole thing was just basically a diving plane, if you will. And they came off, and they could replace them with other wings. The tail section, which is not finished, was like the tail of an airplane. It actually had elevators, and it had a tail rudder. keep modeling.